Chapter 14. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. After proudly announcing her return from the middle of the cafeteria, Mary shifted her little hand forward, pulling Grimm forward and placing him in front of her. From today onwards, know that he is my subordinate. Anyone who makes trouble for him will have me as your enemy. After she finished saying that, she let go of Grimm and swept her right hand through the air. Her claws moved so fast that they seemed to leave after images in the air. As the faint trails of light faded away, 5 sharp whistling noises could be heard by the crowd. What insane agility, and what a terrifying slashing force! With such speed and attack strength, who would have time to recite a spell if she attacked them? After estimating the attack strength of Mary's casual strike, everyone who saw this scene had fear cover their faces. Grimm couldn't help but smile wryly at his current situation. For the first time in his entire life, he felt a headache caused by good fortune. As much as he could, he was a man who strived to live a low-profile life, but, in the end, he was helplessly dragged into what could only result in a fight between those strongest apprentice adepts. Though Mary did this out of good intentions, would a simple threat of violence really be able to hold back those apprentice adepts who feared nothing? In this adept tower, where the hearts of men were incomprehensible, and where everyone was scheming against each other, there were nearly infinite methods of killing someone without being noticed. In the library, a wide variety of knowledge of curse spells and poisonous potions were available. So long as someone willing to put in the effort, it wasn't exactly difficult to make an apprentice adept die an unfortunate death, with no one the wiser. Within this eerie and frightening adept tower, Grimm would never dare let the slightest drop of blood or the tiniest hair on his head fall into someone else's hands. After all, there were countless bizarre spells which could be used against a person. The slightest mistake could end with him become a puppet controlled by someone else. That was also the reason why most of the apprentice adepts lived in the seclusion of their own rooms, rarely having any intimate physical contact with anyone. Sensing the hostile glances shooting at him from all directions, once again Grimm felt speechless, and a bitter smile covered his face. It seems he had found a great method for making a lot of enemies at once. In the past, he was just a harmless low-rank apprentice in other people's minds. Even if he got in some minor arguments, no one would really try to find a method to kill him. But today, he had nearly offended every single apprentice adept in the tower without saying a single word. Without having to think twice, he knew that, from today onwards, he had become a bird of a different feather among all the beginner apprentice adepts. If there was anyone who tried to get in touch with him, either they were probing for Mary's information, or they were plotting his demise. Although Grimm was complaining in his mind, right at this moment he had no other option but to put on a poker face and face these new hardships head-on. After delivered what she intended to say, Mary, who had established her authority, grabbed Grimm and left the cafeteria in a rush. A moment later, the prideful and elegant Mary had, once again, appeared in front of Anne, who was still suffering from the shock of being thrown across a room. "Give me the card of the arena." Mary was showing herself to be a surprisingly domineering and tyrannical person. As she slammed her tiny palm onto the table, everything on it was knocked over. A slimy and ugly frog squeezed out from the pile of books while croaking continuously, quickly jumping onto Anne's shoulder and angrily staring at Mary, who was the culprit of his discomfort. It was a small frog, but it had a huge head, which was quite strange looking. Its slimy back was full of lumps and blisters, which were all filled with green ooze. It had a huge mouth and its eyes were situated on 2 protruding tentacles, giving it a really bizarre look. Frightened, Anne gently patted on the weird head of the frog, turning his head and speaking softly to it. The frog, unwillingly, opened up its mouth and spat out a special card, which was glowing with a golden glaze. Mary snorted coolly, snatched the golden card off the table, turned around, and then dragged Grimm away. Before they left, Grimm couldn't help examining the strange-looking frog. A companion beast. Perhaps this frog was Anne's company beast. Apprentice adepts, like them, who were still struggling in the lower floors of the tower, were all restlessly trying to strengthen themselves. No doubt, increasing one's spirit was the toughest path. Without a magic medicine that grew one's spirit, a top-grade meditation method, and without a formal adept to answer all their questions, they could only depend on themselves to progress. Therefore, any method that could possibly help one in improving their own power was worth it, and companion beasts were, undeniably, a good supplemental method for increasing one's strength. Companion beasts were also known as parasite beasts. They were a unique type of demon that had been modified and bred with magic. Through a special magic ceremony, an apprentice adept could establish a binding between his soul and one of these beasts. Of course, a method like this came with its own pros and cons. On the bright side, an apprentice adept could borrow the innate abilities of the demon, granting himself some special abilities that others didn't have. On the downside, during the process of establishing the companionship, the apprentice had to cut part of his soul and transfer it to the companion beast. With that, if the companion beast was seriously hurt or died, the apprentice himself would suffer the same fate. If the beast was seriously injured, it might cause the apprentice to suffer a permanent spirit depletion, as his soul would be injured. There were known cases where an adept's soul had broken, causing them to become a complete idiot. It was a rule of thumb that an ordinary apprentice adept could only establish a relationship with one beast. But, as in anything, there was always an exception. Evil Bugs, who was one of the 3 strongest apprentices, had taken the path of binding with a companion beast. However, he actually broke through the supposed limit, and somehow had a lot of strange insects within his body. As for how he did that, no one knew. Any apprentice adept who was taking the path of binding with a companion beast would kill for this knowledge, but none of them had the courage to spy on his secret. Because, in the end, anyone who tried to spy on him would end up dead in an accident. Anne, who only had the capability of an intermediate apprentice, had chosen a poison dart frog, who could, unsurprisingly, shoot poisonous darts, as his companion beast. Besides shooting poison, it also had a pretty good regeneration ability. Perhaps, this was the biggest reason Anne had chosen it. When the main door of the stone room had closed up, Mary and Green were left standing there by themselves in a large room. This arena was way bigger than the stone room Green had rented previously, taking up a whole 200 square meters. Thus, this was not a place for apprentice adepts to practice their magic spells, but a miniature fighting arena. If apprentice adepts needed to resolve disputes, usually they would use this arena as a last resort. Although this place came with a rule forbidding them from killing each other, if an accident really happened, the killer wouldn't have to pay with their own life. All they would have to do was pay a large fee as compensation. Hence, many apprentice adepts had a great fear of this arena, and, thus, it had earned the nickname of Arena of Death. Mary's slim figure stood opposite of Grimm's. She had an eerie smile on her delicate face, which Grimm felt was both seductive and cruel. "I don't need a good-for-nothing subordinate. Show me what you are capable of." After announcing this, and without giving him any time to prepare himself, her delicate-looking body swayed, leaving behind a row of after-images. Her real body was mixed in with these after-images, sprinting toward Grimm at an incredible speed. She really meant it. This Mary was really a girl of action. Although Mary had been a rather glacial beauty in the past, she still had held the careful and low-profile character of your standard apprentice adept. How did she become so overbearing, arrogant, and aggressive after being let off by Adept Anderson? Unfortunately, Grimm had no time to ponder on this anymore, because Mary's attack was fast approaching. A series of rapid warning tones resounded in his brain, nearly making him lose focus. Warning, warning. High-speed target approaching. Initial evaluation shows the target has the agility which is greater than 13. Host, please move 2 steps to the left. After dodging, counter-attack with a burning hand spell. As the solidification of the fire arrow was still in progress, Grimm could only use one spell, Burning Hand. The speed of the attack was extremely fast, and Grimm couldn't even see where was the real Mary was. What he could do was to lay all his hope on the guidance given by the chip, move his feet, and step aside, quickly preparing a Burning Hand spell. However, as they say, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Grimm clumsily fell to the ground while only halfway through dodging. His shirt was completely torn at the chest, revealing 3 gashes. He struck out with Burning Hand, but his strike hit nothing. Grimm pressed his hand against his wounds, distraught at what had just happened. He raised his head and gave Mary an angry look. Meanwhile, Mary was standing leisurely to the side, sticking out her long flexible tongue, and licking the blood from her nails. So it seems you have decent reflexes. But your body is too weak. If this speed is all you have, perhaps you're going to suffer today. Maybe it was because she had tasted blood, but her eyes, which had been completely blue, started to take on a shade of red, making her seem so much more dangerous. If you don't want to die, you better move faster. Mary briefly squatted down after she finished speaking, making her look like a leopard preparing to pounce. In the next second, she was rocketing toward him. Damn it, if this went on he really would die. As her eyes began to turn red and her fangs began poked through her lips, warning tones went off like crazy in his brain. Unable to take care of the wounds on his chest, Grimm let out a roar. He forcefully slapped both of his palms together. 3 seconds later, 2 massive fireballs erupted from both of his hands, causing Mary to jump back. This is what I'm talking about. You better watch out. Mary's voice was filled with excitement. She even giggled a bit. In the next second, she leapt forward, turning into a streak of blue. Even with Grimm's dynamic vision, he was still only able to see Mary's after images. He was completely unable to find her actual position. Therefore, in order to avoid her getting too close, Grimm kept moving his body and adjusting his posture to keep the majority of her after images in front of him. Meanwhile, he was crazily waving his hands, attempting to use the burning flame to block off all the possible paths of attack. Both fireballs were making sizzling noises while Grimm was waving them about, pouring sparks of fire all around his body. Unfortunately, it seemed his attempt at defense was pointless. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't figure out where she was. Instead, from time to time, he would feel a sudden sharp pain coming from a new place on his body, and all these were making him more and more furious.